Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal after months of anticipation and emotional build-up, Lucky made his long-awaited return to Port Charles on General Hospital, stepping once again into the familiar yet complicated world that had once defined him. His reappearance stirred a quiet but powerful hope among fans and longtime viewers, hope that perhaps this time, the unresolved threads of his life would be woven into something new and redemptive. Central to that hope was Elizabeth, the woman who had once captured Lucky's heart so deeply that their bond became a cornerstone of the show's emotional legacy. Her presence in Port Charles was like a tether to everything Lucky had ever loved and lost. Viewers watched with hearts full of longing as he gravitated back to her, their shared past palpable in every glance, every word left unspoken. The moment that seemed to promise everything came on a serene afternoon in the park, beneath the quiet rustle of leaves and soft golden light, where Lucky, filled with renewed purpose and a desperate need for belonging, got down on one knee and proposed. It was a scene that echoed decades of history, a moment steeped in nostalgia and aching with possibility. For a brief second, time seemed to stand still, and fans believed they were finally witnessing the reunion they had been denied for so long. The image of Lucky holding out a ring, eyes full of hope, was not just a romantic gesture, it was symbolic of his desire to reclaim something pure from a past overshadowed by trauma, loss, and distance. But the dream unraveled as quickly as it was born. Elizabeth, with visible hesitation clouding her eyes and a voice heavy with unspoken truth, turned him down. Her rejection wasn't cruel, it was heartbreakingly honest. She explained that her life had changed, that she had changed, and that Port Charles no longer felt like the place Lucky belonged. Her world was now firmly rooted in responsibilities, in her children, and in a sense of stability that Lucky, in his transient and often tumultuous nature, could no longer provide. She had built something meaningful in his absence, and she couldn't dismantle it for the uncertain promise of rekindled love. Her words, though said with compassion, landed like a fatal blow. For Lucky, it wasn't just the loss of Elizabeth, it was the shattering realization that the one part of his life he had hoped to rebuild was no longer his to claim. The emotional aftermath of that scene rippled far beyond the fictional world of Port Charles. For fans, it was a devastating letdown. They had waited years, some even decades, to see Lucky and Elizabeth reunited, to see their love triumph over time, pain, and circumstance. The rejection felt like more than a plot twist, it was a dismissal of a storyline that many had invested in for much of their lives. Social media erupted with disappointment and confusion. Some viewers expressed grief, others frustration, but the overwhelming sentiment was one of profound sadness. Not just at the failed proposal, but at the missed opportunity to give Jonathan Jackson's return the weight and depth it deserved. Jackson's comeback had initially been met with celebration. His return in August 2024 was hailed as a triumphant moment for the show, a nostalgic revival of a character who had helped shape its golden era. His chemistry with Jeannie Francis, who portrayed his mother Laura, was magnetic as ever, and their on-screen reunion had been one of the few moments during his limited arc that truly resonated with the emotional core of the show. But beyond that, Lucky's presence was curiously underutilized. He hovered on the periphery of major storylines, lacking a consistent narrative or any real dramatic engine to propel him forward. What should have been a rich, layered return felt instead like a hesitant, half-hearted reintroduction. For 9 months, fans waited for Lucky to be brought into the fold in a way that honored his legacy. But the stories never came. There was no grand mystery, no moral reckoning, no central conflict to challenge him or allow him to evolve. Instead, he remained suspended in a kind of emotional limbo, neither fully reintegrated nor completely extraneous, merely present but not impactful. The silence surrounding his role grew louder with each passing week, and the lack of narrative direction became impossible to ignore. For many viewers, it felt like the show had called Lucky home only to leave him standing alone in the doorway, unsure of where to go or why he had returned at all. Even the proposal, while poignant, was treated as more of a closing chapter than a new beginning. Once Elizabeth said no, it became clear that Lucky's departure was imminent. His decision to leave Port Charles again was framed as a personal reckoning, a painful but necessary step for a man who no longer recognized the place he once called home. He admitted, with quiet resignation, that being near Elizabeth without being with her was more painful than solitude. And so, with a heart once again broken, he began to fade into the background. The sadness of Lucky's storyline was compounded by the suddenness of Jonathan Jackson's exit. There was no official announcement, no clear explanation. One day he was part of the show's fabric, and the next he was gone, leaving behind a sense of narrative abandonment. Rumors swirled that his departure had been abrupt, possibly even unplanned. Whether it was due to creative differences, scheduling conflicts, or dissatisfaction with the direction of the character, fans were left without answers. The lack of closure mirrored Lucky's own unresolved arc, making the goodbye feel even more hollow. In the days following his exit, tributes poured in from longtime viewers who remembered Jackson's earliest scenes in the 1990s, his first love, his battles with addiction, his family's tragedies. For them, Lucky wasn't just another character, he was a touchstone, a symbol of how General Hospital once told stories with unflinching emotional honesty. His journey had been messy, flawed, but deeply human. To see that journey end not with a bang, but with a quiet retreat into narrative obscurity, was more than disappointing. It felt like the loss of an era. There's still talk that the door remains open for Jackson's return someday. Executive producer Frank Valentini has said as much, leaving the possibility dangling like a lifeline for fans who aren't ready to say goodbye. But whether or not that day comes, the sting of this missed opportunity remains. Lucky Spencer came back with hope in his heart and a ring in his hand, ready to write the next chapter of his life. But what he found was that time, love, and storylines sometimes move on without us, and no matter how badly we want to turn back the clock, some moments are gone for good. Lucky's decision to leave Port Charles was far more than just a scripted conclusion. It felt like a sorrowful punctuation mark on the return of a character who once represented the emotional heartbeat of General Hospital. This wasn't just a character quietly bowing out, it was the final chapter in a long and complex journey that had once captivated millions. For fans who had followed his arc since the 1990s, it was a deeply personal goodbye to a man who had been both flawed and heroic, broken and brave. His departure marked the end not only of a short-lived storyline, but of the possibility for any meaningful resurgence in his legacy. It symbolized something far greater, the closing of a door that perhaps should have never been left ajar if it wasn't going to be fully opened. In his final scenes, Lucky made one last heartfelt attempt to salvage something beautiful from the wreckage of lost time. Standing in the shadow of a relationship that had once defined his very soul, he invited Elizabeth to leave it all behind, to pack up the weight of their past and set out on an adventure around the world. It was more than just an offer of escapism, it was a plea for a second chance at a life neither of them had managed to live before. For Lucky, this journey would have been a rebirth, a way to rediscover not only Elizabeth but himself. But Elizabeth, bound by her responsibilities and ever conscious of the people who depended on her, couldn't say yes. She explained that Aidan, even though soon heading off to college, still needed stability, still needed her. More importantly, she needed herself to remain grounded. The life Lucky offered, nomadic, uncertain, liberating, was no longer the one she desired. For Lucky, this refusal was shattering. He didn't rage or plead. He simply absorbed the truth as he always had, with quiet sorrow. He understood that love, as much as it still lived between them in fragmented form, wasn't enough. It wasn't strong enough to untether Elizabeth from her current world, nor was it enough to bind him to a place where he no longer felt welcome. There was no bitterness in his parting thoughts. Only the weariness of a man who had given everything he had left, only to realize that time and distance had carved too deep a chasm between what was and what could have been. His confession that staying in Port Charles, so close to the woman he loved but could never truly have, would be unbearable, was one of the most quietly devastating moments in recent memory. With that, the decision was made. He had to leave. Not because he wanted to escape, but because staying would mean erasing himself piece by piece in a town that no longer had a place for him. The issue of how to tell Aidan about Lucky's departure weighed heavily on both him and Elizabeth. While Lucky had reconciled with his choice internally, the challenge of breaking the news to his son, of once again becoming an absence in his child's life, was almost too much to bear. Elizabeth, ever the steady force of compassion, assured him that she would handle it delicately, that she would ease the pain of the announcement so Aidan wouldn't carry the burden of another disappointment too harshly. It was one of the many moments that reminded viewers of Elizabeth's unshakable grace, and of Lucky's quiet suffering. Still, no matter how kind the words, no matter how gentle the delivery, the truth would remain: Lucky was leaving again. This sequence of events, emotionally rich and laced with nostalgia, could have served as a powerful, redemptive arc for a beloved character. But instead, it felt rushed and unfulfilled. Many fans were left deeply disappointed not only by Elizabeth's rejection, but by how Lucky's return had been handled from the very beginning. They watched with growing concern as he was pushed to the fringes of storylines, rarely involved in central conflicts, and never truly given a moment to reclaim the gravitas that once made him a fixture in Port Charles. It was painful to see a character of such depth in history reduced to a narrative footnote. More painful still was the fact that the actor who embodied him, Jonathan Jackson, who first stepped into the role as a teenager in 1993, was not given the material to shine. There was a collective sense of loss in the fandom, a belief that Lucky, and Jonathan, had been wronged. Jackson's return had been marketed as meaningful, as a real comeback, with promises of significant developments. And yet, after just 9 months, he was gone again, with no fanfare, no major storyline crescendo, and no satisfying resolution. The abruptness of his exit added a layer of confusion and speculation that further muddied the emotional waters. Viewers were left to question whether the writers ever had a concrete plan for him, or if his presence was more a nostalgic nod than a long-term commitment. The mystery only deepened when no official explanation was given. Neither Jonathan Jackson nor the producers released a formal statement clarifying the nature of his departure. According to whispers behind the scenes, Jackson's exit came without warning, leaving writers scrambling to rewrite scenes and restructure upcoming plots. The suddenness of it fueled theories ranging from creative differences to behind-the-scenes tension, to perhaps Jackson himself growing disillusioned with how the character was being used, or rather, neglected. Despite his earlier interviews where he expressed genuine excitement and optimism about his return, it was increasingly clear that the experience had not lived up to his hopes. For longtime fans, the entire situation felt tragically familiar. Lucky had often been written out abruptly in the past, with promises of future returns that rarely delivered on narrative payoff. But this time was supposed to be different. This time, he was older, wiser, and the world of Port Charles was poised for dramatic shifts that he could have helped anchor. Instead, he was once again made into a background figure in his own story, a symbol of unrealized potential. Jonathan Jackson's portrayal of Lucky Spencer has long been regarded as one of the most emotionally resonant in daytime history. His performances, raw, vulnerable, and brimming with quiet strength, left an indelible mark on viewers. That his latest return was allowed to wither away without purpose felt like a disservice not only to him as an actor, but to every fan who had ever believed in Lucky's journey. There were so many directions his story could have taken. A deeper exploration of his struggles with identity, his relationship with Laura, his role as a father to Aidan, or even a slow-burn reconciliation with Elizabeth that honored their history. Instead, what fans received was a ghost of the character they once knew, walking toward the exit before they even had the chance to welcome him home. Whether Lucky will return again someday remains to be seen. The door, as always, has been left slightly ajar. But unless that return is met with a commitment to telling his story with the weight, emotion, and care it deserves, it may be better for him to remain a memory, untouched by half-hearted scripts and squandered opportunities. Because Lucky Spencer, and Jonathan Jackson, deserve more than just a quiet goodbye. They deserve a story worth remembering. Frank Valentini, the longtime executive producer of General Hospital, did express his gratitude for Jonathan Jackson's return to the iconic role of Lucky Spencer, noting that the show was fortunate to have him back, even if only for a limited time. His words, while sincere and filled with respect, were ultimately cold comfort to a fanbase left deeply disappointed by the handling of both the actor's return and the character's arc. Valentini acknowledged the possibility that the door remained open for a future return, a sentiment often echoed in the world of soaps where no character is ever truly gone. But in this instance, even that familiar refrain rang hollow. Because the reality is, no one can say with certainty whether Jonathan Jackson will return again, or if Lucky Spencer, should he reappear, would ever reclaim the emotional gravity he once held within the fabric of Port Charles. To loyal fans of General Hospital, Lucky has never been just another character on the canvas. He is a symbol of a bygone era, a representation of the show's emotional depth and its golden years of layered, character-driven storytelling. His presence evoked memories of turbulent adolescence, first loves, family tragedy, redemption, and personal growth. He was a bridge between generations, the son of legendary figures Luke and Laura, and yet a compelling presence in his own right. One who carried the weight of trauma, responsibility, and longing with a quiet intensity that resonated deeply. When news first broke of Jonathan Jackson's return, it wasn't just exciting, it felt significant. It felt like the beginning of something. Viewers believed this was not just nostalgia bait, but the opening of a new chapter where old wounds might heal, and a beloved character might be restored to his rightful place in the story. But with his abrupt departure and the underwhelming arc that preceded it, what began with hope ended in silence. The moment never came. There was no cathartic reckoning, no meaningful connection forged with his past or with the characters he once held dear. Instead, Lucky faded again, this time more quietly than ever before. There was no grand farewell, no cliffhanger, no dramatic twist, just an exit wrapped in quiet resignation, both on-screen and off. And for viewers who had waited years to see his journey pick up with purpose, this was perhaps the cruelest ending of all, an ending that wasn't an ending, merely an absence. The tragedy lies not in his leaving, but in the unrealized potential that accompanied his return. Lucky's reappearance could have ushered in a powerful new era for the show, a chance to explore legacy, generational trauma, reconciliation, and fatherhood. He could have provided emotional support to Laura during her ongoing trials, offered guidance to younger characters struggling with the same demons he once faced, or reignited a romantic saga that still held embers of unresolved affection. Instead, he was given only a sliver of space in which to exist, and even less in which to evolve. The chance to tell his story in a meaningful way was squandered, and in doing so, the show lost more than just a character, it lost a piece of its soul. For those fans who had longed for a meaningful reunion between Lucky and Elizabeth, the disappointment cuts even deeper. These two characters had weathered so much together, addiction, betrayal, tragedy, and still managed to carry an undeniable emotional thread that, even after years of separation, remained visible to viewers. Their love story was never simple, never neat, but it was real. It mattered. And while not every romance needs to end in reconciliation, the lack of narrative investment in even exploring what their connection could have meant in the present felt like an erasure of their past rather than an evolution of it. As Jonathan Jackson once again exits the screen, fans are left with nothing but memory and longing. There is no triumphant send-off, no final scene that feels like closure. Just silence, and that silence is heavy. Heavy with everything that could have been. A chapter has closed, but it was never properly written. The applause never came, not because the audience didn't care, but because they were denied the performance they were promised. Lucky's presence was a reminder of the deep, emotional storytelling that once made General Hospital a genre-defining masterpiece. His quiet, unexplained departure is a reflection of how far removed the current narrative can be from that past. And yet, despite the disappointment, fans remain hopeful. Hopeful that someday, Lucky Spencer might return with a story worthy of his legacy. That the show will once again remember what made him special, not just as the son of legends, but as a fully formed man who carried the scars and wisdom of everything he had survived. That Jonathan Jackson, a performer whose talent has only deepened with time, will be given the space to shine as brightly as he once did. Until then, Lucky remains a ghost in Port Charles. An echo of what once was, and what, if handled with care and conviction, could still be again.